How can we think in jazz and not only about jazz? Too often, jazz is presented as a linear history. Great musicians, great solos, great recordings. But thinking about jazz only in this way reduces it. Jazz is not only music. It is history, it is racism, power, it is improvisation, community, it is conflict. It is a practice of freedom. But this freedom is not a romantic slogan. It is a tense practice shaped by historical struggle. As historian E. Taylor Atkins argues, jazz emerged from a complex social context shaped by race, class, and modernity. Jazz scholars often describe improvisation as a form of communication. Musicologist Ingrid Monson explains that jazz improvisation functions much like a conversation between musicians. Musicians introduce ideas, respond to one another, repeat phrases, transform rhythms, and develop musical dialogue in real time. Improvisation, therefore, is not simply spontaneous expression. It is a social process. Through listening and responding, musicians collectively construct the performance moment. Dance scholar Sherrie Tucker offers a similar perspective when discussing improvisation in swing dance. She describes improvisation as the act of shaping oneself in relation to an unstable landscape, constantly adjusting movement in response to others and to the surrounding environment. In this sense, jazz improvisation is always relational. Musicians think through interaction. Learning jazz traditionally happens through participation. Scholar Prouty explains that knowledge within jazz communities often circulate through listening, imitation, and performance, rather than through written notation. Musicians learn standards, they internalize patterns, they develop their voice through interaction with others. Improvisation therefore involves both structure and freedom. Jazz musicians think through sound. Although jazz originated within African American communities in the United States, it quickly became global. Atkins argues that jazz is one of the first truly global cultural forms of the 20th century, spreading through recordings, radio, migration, and international performance. As jazz moved across the world, it transformed. Musicians integrated local traditions, rhythms, and identities. Jazz became a transnational cultural dialogue.
My own experience with jazz raised unexpected questions. When I joined a jazz dance class in China, I expected to dance to jazz. Instead, we danced to K-pop. Later, in another class labeled street jazz, the technique resembled ballet training. The teacher corrected my plie and my turns. These experiences made me question something fundamental. If jazz historically emphasize improvisation and interaction, what exactly makes something jazz today? Is it the music, the dance technique, or a way of interacting?
Ronia Altia, a classmate in our seminar Thinking in Jazz, raises a similar question in her project. She asks why a dance form called jazz dance is often taught today through choreographed routines set to pop music rather than jazz. This tension is not accidental. Historically, jazz music and jazz dance developed together in African American communities, sharing principles such as improvisation, rhythmic dialogue, and individual expression within collective structures. However, over time, jazz dance moved into theaters, studios, and commercial training systems. Improvisational social practices were gradually replaced by choreographed routines and standardized technique classes. Today, many jazz dance classes are performed to contemporary pop music rather than jazz. In this sense, what was once a social improvisational practice became increasingly institutionalized. Even when improvisation is encouraged, the final goal often remains the choreography. And in that moment, I began to wonder whether What we were dancing was no longer jazz itself, but a historical conception shaped by theater, Hollywood, and the global dance industry. Later in our seminar Thinking in Jazz, we participated in an exercise called the Privilege Walk. Questions like, did you dance growing up? Did you have an instrument at school? Etc. Made me feel not that good. Standing in the room listening to the different statements, something shifted for me. I began to realize that even dancing can be a form of privilege. To dance well in institutional settings requires training, access, time, and knowledge of specific techniques. Not everyone has equal access to these systems. What appears as an open artistic space can also reproduce invisible hierarchies. I'm going inside and I will meet my colleagues and I will just start randomly whatever it comes from myself, my thinking in jazz something, and let's see how they react or what kind of music they bring. But this is part of this idea of me that jazz somehow belongs to all of us and is inside of us. Let's see. What? Instead of moving, I began producing simple rhythms with my voice. Without any instructions, the others responded. They listened, they echoed the rhythm, they adapted their own sounds to it. A small exchange began to form. This moment resembled a fundamental principle of jazz, call and response, a dialogic structure deeply rooted in African diasporic musical traditions. One voice initiates, another responds. The pattern evolves through interaction. Funny, this happened without choreography, without a teacher, without anyone deciding what to correct. For a brief moment, the interaction itself became the structure, and in that moment, I began to wonder whether the essence of jazz might not lie in a specific style, but in this relational process of listening, responding, and creating together. If jazz music and jazz dance once shared this improvisational principle, as Ronya, my colleague, project suggests, what would it mean to rethink jazz dance today through these same principles of dialogue and collective improvisation? Yet, the question remains. If jazz emerged from improvisation, dialogue, and collective creation,
What happens when these practices enter institutions, dance studios, music schools, training systems, spaces that often prioritize technique, control, and choreography? My experiment did not resolve this tension, but it revealed something simple. Even without choreography, even without instruments, a small moment of jazz can still appear. A rhythm, a response, a shared act of listening. Perhaps jazz is not only something we perform, perhaps it is something we practice in relation to others, a way of responding to difference, a way of creating together within uncertainty. So the question might not be what is jazz. The question might be what happens when we begin to think with jazz.